Hello there, and thanks for joining me, Jessy Chahal, right here on this edition of The Brief. Now, on today's edition, I'll be speaking with Nigel Wong, Secretary General of the Malaysian Association of Tour and Travel Agents. Perhaps you'd better know that as MATA. And as usual, Nordin Abdullah will join us shortly for the crisis brief. But first, here's some updates from the Parliament as we know that they are in session. Tan Sri Anwar Musa has said this earlier today that the ministry, or rather the Communications and Multimedia Ministry, has no power to order pay TV operator Astro to forego its 50-cent commission charge imposed for bill payments at post offices. Now, this commission, or 50-cent commission, is a commercial arrangement that Astro made with other agents with regards to bill payments. So, the minister noted today that there are alternative methods of payment where Astro customers could avoid paying the commission, such as Astro's very own online portal, its payment service counters, as well as the platform JomPay. Now, moving on, according to Datuk Sri Dr. Adham Baba, the initial assessment for Linus' proposed permanent disposable facility in Gebeng Industrial Area is expected to be decided by next month. That is the timeline given. Now, he's added the EIA, or the Environmental Impact Assessment, and the Radiological Impact Assessment (RIA) were submitted to the Atomic Agency, or Atomic Energy Licensing Board, AELB, a lot of acronyms here, and the Environment Department, of course, the DOE, for assessment in September. Now, Linus is the largest rare earth producer outside of China, and it's had its operating license renewed right up till the year 2023. Still on the Parliament, a splash of colour was added to the Dewan Rakyat today following the historic start of the Batik Thursday for MPs. Most MPs were seen donning batik attire at the House. Now, on October 11th, the Dewan Rakyat's House Committee agreed for MPs to be allowed to wear long-sleeved Malaysian batik when attending Dewan Rakyat sitting on Thursdays. So we look forward to some fashion updates perhaps on Thursdays. Well, it's time for the crisis brief with Nordin Abdullah. I'd like to bring in Nordin right now. Nordin, thanks for joining me once again. You've got a few things on the plate for us. Do bring us up to speed.
Hi, Jessy. It's always good to join you here on the crisis brief. We're tracking two stories today. The first is actually coming out of Bukit Aman, where we are looking at the number of cheating cases is on the rise. And it's involved over 380 million ringgits worth of fraud in the last 9 months. So that's kind of equating to over 1 million ringgit per day. And I think this is one area that the government has continued to push the need for individuals to really take into consideration some of the financial options. And usually we say if a deal is too good to be true, then it usually is. And we've seen that while the criminals, while we are staying home, the criminals they themselves are also staying home, and they've adapted very quickly to lockdown conditions, and we've seen that develop as a story. And some of the solutions I think that have been proposed is to increase the level of communications as well as the level of education, perhaps starting at the school level. The other area, and this is not just a Malaysian story, but a global story, and it also impacts what we're going to be talking about later today in the show, as well as what's going to be presented in tomorrow's budget, is around the tourism and travel sector. Some of the data that's coming out of the international bodies is talking about the duration of quarantine and how long quarantine takes and how much that impacts the appetite of global tourists from traveling at the moment. Of course, some countries have already opened up travel without quarantine. Malaysia has not got there yet, although experimenting with the Langkawi tourism bubble, this is still not being finalized in terms of what the whole country will do. But we do need to look at this as part of a continuum and where we are on the global spectrum. But I think it's also important to remember where we've come from. In the last few months, we've gone from people not even being able to get into the country whether they were business people or even some Malaysians trying to return them home. So the fact now that we're looking at the solutions for better travel solutions for global tourists, I think it's really a good time as we move into this next budget and we start to look at what that means for the tourism sector here in Malaysia. So that's
Right.
it
No,
for our brief today, Jessy.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on what you spoke about in terms of borders reopening and tourism and travel. Now, of course, we can also draw examples from countries whose borders are already open and are accepting tourists as well. We also know just a couple of days ago it was announced that Langkawi will be open to foreign tourists soon. Now, on the brink of all of this, how do we handle crisis communications, or rather, how do we prevent a crisis from happening in terms of misinformation, or perhaps better said, to provide direct and verified information in a manner that can be easily understood by all, especially when there's so many SOPs involved, and at the back of that also, if you do not comply to the SOPs, non-compliance equates to a hefty penalty. Nordin.
Jessy, and I think this is one area that we've got to create a balance, and creating that balance is going to be the difficult part. One thing I like about using Langkawi as a test case, really, as that first travel bubble, getting it right there means you're able to then take that good example and then roll it out for the rest of the country. And I think that's an important step for getting it right. When it comes to ensuring that travelers are safe, we need to be able to do that to ensure that we have a sustainable recovery. And what does sustainable recovery look like? It means that it's not just going to sekejap ada, sekejap tak ada lah, to use the Malay term, that you can start for a little while because you will just spend a lot of money on promotions, and then people will find out that things have changed. So in terms of communications, it's ensuring that you actually get the SOPs right and the process right, and then communicate your success. And I think that's going to be the key for Malaysia's sustainable recovery.
Okay, very quickly, budget big day tomorrow. We are all, with our notebooks and pens ready to take notes and note those highlights as well. It's going to be tabled tomorrow, Nordin. In terms of tourism, since we're talking about it right now, what are some of your perhaps predictions, or how do you foresee the budget being allocated so that we can literally hit the ground running to boost once again a sector that has been so badly hit?
For me, I hope that there's a lot of money put into tourism because there's a few reasons. Tourism employs a lot of people. And when you look at a recovery that is economically led and job-centric, tourism is the place to get it done. What needs to be done is the SOPs need to be correct, and our ability to create a safe environment for our customers, in this case, tourism visitors to the country. So getting that equation right is going to be so important for this budget and the next 12 months of Malaysia's economic recovery.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nordin. We'll speak to you soon. That was Nordin Abdullah, crisis management analyst and expert, weighing in on some of the perhaps potential crisis and also perspectives on some of the big trending stories that's happening in the country. Of course, the budget will be tabled tomorrow. That is a big day, and we will be having constant programs to underline some of the highlights and discuss with subject matter experts as well. So do keep it locked on to Bernama TV tomorrow, and of course on Saturday as well. Now, the Health Ministry has slapped Barisan Nasional or BN with a 10,000 ringgit fine for their failure to ensure adequate physical distancing during the election machinery launch for the Malacca elections at the World Trade Center just yesterday. KKM announced on Twitter that the Kepong Health Office had issued the compound after Barisan Nasional was found to violate event organizing SOPs. It's all on the SOPs. If we want to get back to normality, it really has to be 100% compliance to the SOPs. Now, Muda was issued a 4,000 ringgit fine for violating the ban on rallies by holding a press conference. The press conference was held to announce Muda's participation in the Malacca election polls, despite it not being a registered party yet. Now, the Malacca Tengah District Police Chief said that action was taken because the situation at the rally had made it impossible for social distancing. Moving on now to numbers and the economy. In economic news, the ringgit continues to depreciate against the US dollar, with investors waiting on the sidelines ahead of the budget 2022, which of course will be tabled tomorrow. Now, the ringgit has been experiencing technical correction, as they say, due to its overbought position. It depreciated against the Singapore dollar to 3.07 and fell against the euro to 4.81. Now, here's another piece of update. This time on the AUKUS, Malaysia has again expressed its concerns over the trilateral security pact involving the US, the UK, and Australia. Of course, when you combine these countries in terms of their names, it spells the acronym AUKUS. At the 16th East Asia Summit. Now, all these happened yesterday. According to the Prime Minister, developments such as this can lead to an arms race. It can spark tension, which could then lead to instability within the region. So the Prime Minister underscored the importance of preserving Southeast Asia as a nuclear weapon-free zone and has added that matters relating to the South China Sea must be resolved peacefully and constructively. Well, talking about things of peace, the Prime Minister also touched on cyber security, saying that Malaysia welcomes the support towards the ASEAN Cyber Defence Network. In regards to climate change, Malaysia will work towards fulfilling its environmental commitment to reduce carbon intensity by up to 45% by 2030. At this time, I'm joined by Nigel Wong, Secretary General of the Malaysian Association of Tour and Travels Agents, to talk about the current tourism sector and its issues. And of course, on the back of the budget 2022, what are the expectations? Hi, Nigel. Welcome to the brief. It's good to speak to you again. And as I understand, it's a busy time for you and all at the agency, as well as the travel and tourism sector, tries to bounce back. Now, how do you see the tourism sector evolving in the next few years as we get news of more and more borders being able to open?
Hey, Jessy, good to see you again. Look, it's going to be a very interesting time for tourism. And I think with regards to your question, we've seen some emerging trends coming about, things like people wanting to travel more in smaller groups or even doing a couple of solo travels. We've seen a demand in terms of what people have been looking for online in their searches for experiences that involve the outdoor, the great outdoors, back to nature. They're looking a bit more for experiential travel experiences, especially because it's going to be the millennials that will make up, this expected of course, the bulk of the traveling public once things begin their journey of recovery back to what we think is the norm.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing perhaps a lot more traction as well for business travels, for those who need to travel for health purposes? And also, do you foresee perhaps a lot of interest in international travel as well at this point?
Well, there's always going to be interest in international travel, be it leisure or business. But practically speaking, at this point, we're looking at what we would loosely term as essential travel. Businesses will have to travel. That's a given. And of course, as what you say, in terms of medical tourism or healthcare concerns, people are traveling. And I believe they still have been traveling during this time, although on a much lower scale, to get treatment in various countries, like Malaysia, for example, Thailand, very special cases. Now, moving forward, we do see a big demand in healthcare tourism. And so that is something I think the Malaysian travel industry, or part of it anyway, will probably be focusing or pivoting towards.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Hopefully, people will find traveling fun and comfortable again, without worrying about so much about, being exposed perhaps, but that can only work if 100% compliance is met by the travel operators, hotels, and of course the tourists themselves. Now, you have a slightly different perspective on international travel to this country. A few days ago, you said the government needs to ensure that the requirement for international arrivals is not too restrictive. Please walk us through your thoughts about this. I mean, in reference to quarantine periods and required documents and so on and so forth.
Okay. So when we say it's supposed to be less restrictive, it's simply based on the fact that if there are too many restrictions, it becomes difficult to understand what the SOPs are going to be. And the perception straight up would be that Malaysia is going to be too troublesome to visit because of all these restrictions. Now, if you look at countries like Singapore, for example, with their VTL schemes, or look at Thailand, where they've gotten the first, I would say, successful travel bubble into ASEAN, with Phuket. The messaging was clear and simple, although it may be related to specific arrangements with specific countries. Now, on that note, what you and Nordin discussed earlier on about quarantine times, quarantine is going to be a major factor as to whether people are going to want to even think about traveling to Malaysia in the first place. And this is not just about foreigners coming in. I mean, travel is a two-way kind of business. If there are no flights going out, there won't be any flights coming in. So this kind of conditions also have to be extended to Malaysians returning to Malaysia after visiting another country for whatever purpose it may be. And I think last but not least, specifics aside, SOPs need to be very clear and concise and simple, because the last thing we want to do is to have our tourism players, penalized unnecessarily, or the overheads being too high just in trying to enforce SOPs. So it need to be very simple.
Okay, so of course, SOPs play a huge role in trying to keep everyone safe and out of trouble as well. How can we ensure everyone's safety while we help the tourism industry bounce back? It's going to take, perhaps, in my personal opinion, perhaps a couple of months till we really see it gain the momentum it had pre-COVID as well. But at this point till then, how do we ensure everyone's safety?
Well, again, back to your earlier discussion, the Langkawi travel bubble is a good way to do that. It's a way to educate the industry as well as the public, and put in place or even test some of the measures that we have in place, handling smaller groups of international arrivals. Now, the SOPs we have are already actually quite sufficient. They are WHO compliant. Everybody's used to it. We follow it almost without thinking most of the time, all right? I say most of the time. And this is the same with international tourists. They also are fairly familiar with most of the standard SOPs that they adhere to back home. So maybe in answer to your question, Jessy, it's going to be a while before we see really huge numbers flocking into the country. Now is the best time to put into practice some of these procedures that we've already set up, give it a run for its money, and then improve along the way.
Wonderful. Nigel, we know that the budget will be tabled tomorrow. What are your hopes and expectations for this in terms of what it can provide for the tourism industry? And do you think the industry can bounce back post-pandemic, Nigel?
Okay, the bounce back will be a little bit slow, we believe, because the travel industry in general has not really had any income for the last almost 1.5 years. It's literally at zero. And so a lot of businesses who have not yet closed are going to find it a challenge to just get back on their feet, rehire the people that they've had to let go of, maintain their vehicles, get their properties up to speed. There's a lot of cost that has to go into this before the country is going to be able to welcome a lot more tourists to our shores. So in terms of the budget, I mean, there are a lot of things that every industry is requesting, everything from work subsidies. But I think for the travel industry, we've got 3 things that we really want to see happening. Now, even though domestic travel may not be the long-term answer to our industry, it's still very important as a Kickstarter. So we're going to ask, and we're going to hope that the government's going to provide more stimulus or incentive in terms of maybe tax relief for people and companies that are going to be traveling and holding events in the country. Number 2, we're also looking at a bit more stimulus for the industry itself in terms of the operators, running their businesses. And I think most importantly, Jessy, is that the industry needs a separate fund that is designed to not only sustain the industry, but to help them expand and to regrow. And that has to be separate from the current funds that are put under the purview of the banks and financial institutions, because it's been quite hard to obtain some of this funding, and the reputation isn't so good, so people are just not trying.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nigel, for joining us in our conversation. Of course, Nigel Wong, Secretary General of the Malaysian Association of Tour and Travel Agents, or MATA, talking about the current tourism sector, some of the issues and expectations for budget 2022. Nigel, we'll speak to you soon. Do take care. Moving on, non-compliance of federal ministries and departments with financial management has led to issues involving irregular payments, loss of public funds, and wastage amounting to 620 million ringgit just last year. Now, according to the Auditor General, Datuk Nik Azman Nik Abdul Majid, 499.19 million ringgit was lost from payment for maintenance services claims that were not verified at the National Security Council level. Now, meanwhile, 81.69 million ringgit was lost from unclaimed penalties not imposed by the Immigration Department, and 4.79 million for equipment that was received late and not installed at the Istana Budaya. As usual, I have a vaccination update for you in terms of numbers based on the Health Ministry's data of the COVID Now portal. As of yesterday, 94.9% of the adult population in the country have completed their vaccination. That's 22,214,490 people completely vaccinated. As for those aged between 12 to 17, 62% have completed their vaccination as well. Those numbers also on the rise as more data is being released and confirms that vaccination is indeed important to keep us safe. Remember, the WHO says none of us are safe until all of us are safe. And speaking of the WHO, it is now saying that it is closely tracking a Delta subvariant to determine whether it is more transmissible than the original Delta strain, as global COVID-19 cases are on the rise again. It is also examining, WHO, whether people are more resistant to this particular subvariant. It's called AY or A.4.2, which has been detected in at least 42 different countries. And here's the news in brief. If you're a big fan of Hapsing, Jacobs, and Julie's, yes, all household biscuit brand names, well, here's some good news for you. The Health DG, Tan Sri Dr. Nur Hisham Abdullah, has said that the average level of content in biscuits and crackers in the local market is below the benchmark set by the European Commission regulations. He's referring to the acrylamide substance, which of course has gone viral as well, to be cancerous and dangerous. He sets this issue straight. It also became an issue that went viral after the products were exposed to contamination at the factories as well. Now, among the brands being talked about, of course, Hapsing, Jacobs, and Julie's, all brands manufactured here in Malaysia. Moving on to Bukit Aman, its commercial CID Deputy Director, Datuk Muhammad Hasbullah Ali, says a total of 15,935 online cheating cases were recorded in the first 9 months of the year, with losses amounting up to 380 million ringgit. Now, these cases included those involving the African scam, which we've heard a lot about, the Macau scam, non-existent loans, investments, and even e-commerce. Now we move on to some news internationally, starting with Russia. Its president has told the head of the Kremlin-controlled giant or energy giant Gazprom to start pumping natural gas into European gas storage once Russia finishes filling its own stocks. Now the president says this would improve the situation on the European energy market. And from that, moving on to the US ASEAN relations, President Joe Biden has said the United States would stand with Southeast Asian allies in defending freedom of the seas, democracy, and human rights. He's also backed efforts to hold the Myanmar junta accountable to its commitments to peace. Now, Southeast Asia has become a strategic battleground between the United States and China, which has, of course, turned up military and political pressure of Taiwan. And as we move on, speaking of China, a paper or white paper from China has mentioned that China is undergoing historic changes in coping with climate change. While China's economic and social development has been developing rather healthily, the carbon emission intensity has dropped significantly. Now, the country's carbon emission back in 2020 was 18.8% less than what it was back in 2015. So they say that it is undergoing historic changes while it tries to cope with climate change. Now, it also claims that China has the fastest reduction in energy consumption in the world. It is now focusing on clean and low carbon energy consumption. And in football news, Barcelona sacked coach Ronald Koeman after yesterday's 1-0 La Liga defeat to Rayo Vallecano. The Spanish club is currently ninth in the La Liga on 15 points from 10 games, 6 points behind leaders Real Madrid. And leading up to next year's Winter Olympics, the Beijing Olympic Organizing Committee, or BOCOG, if you want to call it BOCOG, unveiled its official uniforms for staff, technical officials, and volunteers just yesterday on the 100-day countdown to the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics. Now, according to the committee, the uniforms consist of clothing, shoes, accessories, featuring elements of core graphics of the games presented in traditional Chinese landscape painting techniques. So it's using cutting-edge clothing technology to ensure the clothes and the shoes are warm, that they are waterproof, and they're also light to wear during the winter season. Hey, here's what's happening on Twitter. Are you watching our show with a data plan? Netizens using Digi woke up this morning to a third day of not having service. A nightmare to be without data or any sort of access to internet, especially for those urban folk or whose work relies so much on or working from home, for example. Moving on to international news, to infinity and beyond, they say, well, in a world where we have more sequels and prequels than we really need, it comes as no surprise. Disney Pixar has just announced a new Buzz Lightyear movie. This movie will star Chris Evans as the famous toy from the Toy Story franchise. And in sports, hashtag French Open 2021. That's trending as badminton fans are now reeling from Li Zijia's shock loss to Singapore's Loh Ken Yew just yesterday. However, all hope is not lost for us, for Malaysia, as many other Malaysian players have qualified to the next round, including women's doubles pair Perlithan and M. Tina. That brings me to the end of this edition of The Brief. Thank you so much for being with me. Tune in tomorrow at 12 as we bring you more updates and outlooks as well on what's happening in and around the country. I'm Jessy Chahal. Thanks for watching.